Welcome to the third episode of Two Pastors.
Wait, can we start over? Sorry. I was adjusting when you started. Okay. Now I'm ready.
Go, one of y'all put your hands up like this. Alright. Perfect. Good.
Welcome to the third episode of Two Pastors and a Plant. The question for us today is, when do we
need to introduce ourselves for the audience?
Okay. I don't think so. They should know who we are. The question for us today is, when do we take the Lord's Supper? Now, of course, this question is really important for us today because we're in the middle of a really strange time where we can't meet together. But this question, I think, is always important. The Lord's Supper is crucial in the life of the church. You can't really define what a church is apart from the Lord's Supper. For hundreds of years, Protestants have largely agreed that one of the marks of the church is the right administration of the sacrament. So it's always an important question. And in Scripture, when these instructions are given to the churches in the epistles, again, they're assumed and explicitly stated in 1 Corinthians 11, for example, that we're supposed to do this when we come together. When we come together. And so today, obviously they didn't have this pandemic in mind when we can't be together. So what does that look like for us today? Should we practice this sacrament? We can't be physically together, but of course we don't want to miss out on this, great ordinance that Jesus has given to His church. So how should we take the Lord's Supper virtually?
Well, I don't think we should take it virtually. And, reasonable Bible-believing people can disagree on this. But 1 Corinthians 11, you mentioned it, verse 20 says, when you come together for the Lord's Supper. And so I don't know that it's commanded that we come together. And again, who knows? There's no way that the Apostle Paul could have anticipated this scenario when it comes to giving instructions for taking the Lord's Supper. But our position has been that since we haven't been able to meet since March 15th in person, I take the position that Grace Bible that we haven't actually had a worship service. We haven't had a Sunday morning gathering since March 15th. Now, we've done live streams every Sunday. We've got content like this and Bible studies streamed during the week. But we haven't met as a church since March 15th. So how could we take the Lord's Supper until it happens again? People can argue differently, and there's this movement called online church, and that we don't have to be in the same room with one another. Again, faithful Christians can disagree on this, but I take that to be a denial of just who we are as human beings. We are ensouled bodies, and we aren't meeting together unless we're physically in the same place. So no Lord's Supper.
I agree with you. I think part of my role probably on this video podcast thing is play devil's advocate and disagree with you when I can.
Drew.
I know.
It's kind of creepy.
A lot of people have been talking about this. It's a very important question. Again, I was looking at the Gospel Coalition website. They had two articles. One person was arguing for practicing the Lord's Supper, administrating the Lord's Supper online. Another person was arguing against it. The person that was arguing for it, I think one of his best points was this. He says, while it's true that 1 Corinthians 11, so he agrees that that's a huge emphasis in 1 Corinthians 11 when you're gathered together, it's also true that Paul considers himself to be spiritually present with the Corinthians as they practice church discipline in 1 Corinthians 5. That's another mark of the church. So if Paul can be spiritually present with them there, can we then be spiritually present together and partake of this? Yeah.
Well, a couple of different things. I mean, Paul's an apostle, and so he has a role in church discipline that nobody has with relation to Grace Bible Church now. And it's also true that Jesus is spiritually present every time we gather, but that doesn't affect our view of what the church is or how to administer the sacraments one way or the other. So I see what he's saying. I just don't think it proves what he thinks it's proving by making that point.
So I hear him saying it is possible for us to be spiritually present together. Obviously, that's a
Well,
huge implication.
We're spiritually present. Ephesians 2 says we're all spiritually present in heaven right now. We've already been raised and seated with Christ. Yes, I agree. I just don't know what that has to do with the Lord's
This
Supper.
ordination was given when you gather together physically. Yeah.
Yeah, the command was to be when we're physically gathered, and a related, not quite what you're asking, but what I've had people ask is, how about like small groups outside the church when they are meeting together?
I was going to ask that next.
Oh, okay, sorry. And again, I don't think it's wise. That may be happening at Grace Bible Church for all I know. I would not recommend it, but nothing's going to happen if that's going on. But I would say that what you're doing is, when you take it outside the church, whether it's at a retreat or at a summer camp, I've heard that before, or presiding at a wedding, just a couple does that. When you take it outside the context of a local church, just be careful what you're doing, because basically what I think you're saying is, we are at least temporarily our own local church. And that implies a responsibility that I don't think anybody that takes it outside the context of a local church wants. And I understand that there are powerful feelings of connection that take place when you take the Lord's Supper in an intimate setting like that, but we can't let feelings be our guide. You can have powerful feelings inside of a dating relationship, yet do things that are properly reserved for marriage. I'm not saying those are the same thing, but just as by way of analogy. So it is a church sacrament. That's how it's been understood. We only have it in the New Testament in that context. We need to keep it there.
What I admire a lot about the people arguing for taking the Lord's Supper online is they really want to not miss out on the Lord's Supper. And that is a great thing. I mean, nobody wants to not do this. But I agree with you, obviously. It should be something that we grieve not having, and sort of, give us a greater sense of wanting to take it. And that first meal, maybe when we get back together, is going to be extremely, special. And I have a sense of a longing for that. It's a couple weeks ago we should have taken it, and we missed out. And
that would be my counter argument to, the feelings that we miss out on now. Well, I think we're storing up for that day, and it'll make that day all the sweeter. So I think the intimacy argument can cut both ways.
Right. Well, final question from the plant. The plant has a final question. If
it better be a good one.
It's a good one. If you were stranded on an island and you could take one staff member, who would that staff member? You have to give an answer. Who would that staff member be?
Does it have to be from our church or some other church?
Yes, it has to be from Grace. Currently, not a former. Can't take Brad Blaylock or Skylar. Not that you would want to take.
I was thinking Tim Keller. He's on staff at another church. Yeah. I'm going to go with Jared because he can play the guitar.
Oh, that's good.
And we could have our own little, worship service, the two of us. He can sing, I can preach.
That's a good one. All right. That's episode 3. Thanks for watching. Again, we'd love to hear any questions you might have that you want us to address. We'll see you next time.